Thank you. I'm clearly not very good at following instructions because it's a slightly different talk. But try to remember 11 years ago. I think a lot of you here probably were talking about blogging. Some of you may have been blogging. Some of you were reading blogs. One thing you probably were not doing is writing a blog when you were actually writing a post to a blog. Pet peeve. You don't blog things. But what's really important is sorry. So we didn't have Twitter back then, but a lot of us were blogging about blogging, which is what you do at the beginning of any new technology because you really don't have anything else to do other than talk about it. And one of the things that we realized, though, was that, hey, this may actually impact the way we think about democracy, and we came up with this paper. And this is the old traditional model where you have a government, and then you have media that extracts information about governments and about companies and educates or informs and engages to some extent the public, but the public aren't really able to communicate with each other very effectively at scale, so that it's kind of like this unconscious body sitting there that's being sort of fed stuff. And then what you have to do is have to figure out what this unconscious body is thinking by polling it and by asking it to vote, and then it comes back and it gives you feedback into the government. So it's this sort of unconscious, subconscious thing that you care about because they're the ones that carry the guns and go to war for you and things like that. And so this is the old model, and we believe that with social media, things would change, and they did. And I think the current model now is that we have people that have sort of woken up. They can talk to each other. Actually, they can overthrow governments and things like that, but they talk to each other. They create social media, but social media is still kind of this sort of add-on to mainstream media because we still use the mechanism of voting as a primary way that we get things done or we engage with government. So at some level, we're still, I think, in a place where the public has become a little bit more conscious, where all of us can get together and form a movement. But that movement still fundamentally expresses itself ultimately through voting. But I want to pivot and then come back to this. So when I took the job at the Media Lab, that was a really big pivot in my own life. And what I realized, and I had been doing this with venture investing, but one of the big things, and this is kind of obvious, but just I'll state it. What the internet did was the internet lowered the cost of communication, collaboration, and distribution to nearly zero, right? And Moore's law lowered the cost of computing to nearly zero. We heard about abundance and the sort of geometric scales. So what that means is the cost of innovation goes down to nearly zero. Okay, and what does that mean? It means that the cost of trying something, especially, and you throw in there the fact that open source and free software suddenly become much bigger because the cost of collaborating has gone to zero, and so you don't actually need to pay a lot of money to participate. So what does that do? So in the old days, and I think many of you may remember, before the internet, I call that BI. BI, what we had to do was, if you wanted to create a Minitel, or if you wanted to create some big thing, you'd have to raise a lot of money, because it costs a lot of money to build stuff from scratch. So you'd have this person, often wearing a necktie like Seth was, and they would write a plan or create a policy to raise the tens or hundreds or billions of dollars that you needed in order to build the thing. So there is a plan or a policy person, and then there's a money person, and this may be the government, it may be a bank. And then you'd spec it out and hire the engineers, and you build the thing. So it was plan, raise money, build thing. That was how startups worked, that's how government worked. What happened when the cost of innovation goes nearly to zero, and I'm just using Google as an example, but Google, Yahoo, Facebook, pick your favorite student startup. They built the thing without any funding because it cost nothing to connect it to the internet. It was a PC with open source software and a bunch of stuff. So Google builds the thing, connects it to the internet, and I remember very well when they connected to the internet because I was the chairman of InfoSeek Japan at the time, and they were one click away. And then they raised, I think, about $50 million before they even have a business model. And then later they might need a business person or they might not, right? So you go from MBA, moneybags, engineer, to engineer, moneybags, maybe MBA, right? And this is, you could replace engineer with designer, but whatever it is, it's the person, Seth was talking about, the people who get off the plane and actually do shit can do it without permission. And the whole thing about the internet, it's not a piece of technology, it's a philosophy, which is permissionless innovation. Because without the restriction of having to raise money, you can do whatever you want within sort of legal frameworks. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So Safecast is a nonprofit that I helped start. On March 11th, 2011, this is the day of the earthquake, I happened to be in Boston interviewing for my new job at the Media Lab. And so I panicked. I said, oh my God, my house is within fallout distance of this nuclear reactor that's blowing up. What am I going to do? So I went onto the internet and started reaching out to my friends. I got in touch with Ray Ozzie because he understood big data. I found some people making websites that were trying to map the data. I found some people who understand radiation, friends who are hardware hackers. And we, within a week, probably assembled a pretty interesting team of people who knew how to make Geiger counters, who knew how to collect the data, who knew how to display the data. And Ray and a bunch of us said, well, let's go move forward. And this, by the way, John C. Lee Brown, former chief scientist of Xerox PARC, has this great phrase called the power of pull, which is you pull things from the network as you need them instead of stocking things and controlling them from the center. And so my contrast here is the Japanese government at the time had all of these plans and all of this money, and they were centrally controlling a complete disaster of a plan. It didn't work. It was a mess. But we started knowing nothing, and using the network and using the internet, we were able to assemble a ragtag but extremely effective team of people to go out and collect the data and do citizen science. So what we did was we first realized that these sensors, well, first of all, Geiger counters you couldn't get. You go online, you can find these old Ukrainian Chernobyl-era Geiger counters that were probably rip-offs anyway. And so we found out where we could get the sensors, and we said, okay, we can't build enough. We're going to have to put them on automobiles and drive them around. So we did that. And then we met up with these Fukushima volunteers because we would go into these cities in Fukushima, and the government had just come in hazmat suits and measured the data and left without telling the people the data. So these funny foreigners would show up with these T-shirts, and they'd say, oh, well, let me show you. Your radiation measurements here, they're 4 times as high in the top floor because the cesium stuck to the roof. So you should move your kids to the first floor, and let's get rid of this pile here. And these Fukushima people said, oh, wow, you guys are helping us. We're going to create a nonprofit, and we're going to take what you've taught us. And next time this happens in any other country, we're going to say, we're from Fukushima, we're here to help. And this is this amazing sort of citizen science moment, which was awesome. And then we created this mapping. We now have almost 10 million data points. The Japanese government has probably 20,000, and it's not open. Ours are completely open under a Creative Commons Zero license. And you can see the exclusion zone there. That plume shows how much radiation is outside the exclusion zone. We found families that were moved from lower radiation to higher radiation. Right? And so obviously government didn't like this data being out. And there's an iPhone app if you want to download it. And we designed a Geiger counter. Geiger counters didn't get much love in innovation, so one of our students, or graduates from the Media Lab, created a Geiger counter, which you can now, let me see, you guys are, this is about 0.08 microsieverts per hour, which is pretty low background radiation, you're safe. But we created, so it was designed by one of our members, it's being manufactured by one of our members, it's one of the best Geiger counters around, but it's open hardware. You can download the plans for this and make it yourself. And so just like with software, the cost of innovation going nearly to zero because of open source software, hardware is starting to have the same thing, this exponential growth, because we're seeing this. So the ability to do things in hardware and in software is becoming extremely easy. And the example that I want to give here is co-design. So we went to Detroit. I'm on the board of the Knight Foundation. One of our communities is Detroit. Detroit's really, really hard to do anything about because they really don't want to see you. So actually, that's how I met Shaka. I went to Detroit and said, hey, we're here to help. And then Shaka got up and said, you know, if you're coming here with this romantic do-gooder attitude, we don't need you. If you want to see the real Detroit, come back and I'll show you. And so he took our students to Brightmoor, to East Detroit, and showed us the real Detroit. And we looked at a lot of problems. One of the problems was there aren't enough streetlights. 50,000 streetlights, half of them are gone, and people are afraid of the streets. So our students at MIT said, oh, okay, well, It turns out metal gets stolen for scrap, and if you plug it in, the city regulates it. So it's this kind of plastic photovoltaic solar streetlights. And we're going to design it, we're going to go, and we're going to deploy them. So we did a 2.5-day hackathon with about 6 projects. But then when we got there and we started talking with Shaka and his friends, they said, it's not really about lighting the streets. It's about whether my friends are around. I want to know if my community's around. And we said, that's interesting. And then Shaka, I think, mentioned that this was a desert. There was the only thing within walking distance were liquor stores. So we went to a liquor store and we realized, hey, they sell flashlights at liquor stores. And the MIT kids said, hey, I have an idea. You can rip open a flashlight. And so we ripped open a flashlight and started to teach the kids how to solder and really basic electronics. And the kids learned and they got excited. And then they said, let's put them on ourselves and make these wearables. And then the kids started teaching each other, and in one of the church maker spaces started making these and started running around the street. And they had solved the streetlight problem without building a streetlight. And the thing that was really beautiful here is one of the kids that works with Shaka came up to me and said, I was sitting next to an MIT student, and my idea won. I want to be a designer. And one of my MIT kids came up to me and said, I could never have designed this sitting in my lab in Cambridge. It was only by being here in Detroit and working with these people and understanding them. And I would never have believed that these kids in Detroit would learn how to solder and make electronics in 2.5 days and would be running around the streets. And so this was the most important learning moment of the year for me, too. And this, to me, this is the word co-design. Industrial old design is when the engineers design. We're talking about Henry Ford. Henry Ford, they made them black because they dried faster. That's in engineering design. People-centric design, human-centric design is Steve Jobs saying, hey, let's worry about the user. Participatory design is when you solicit input from the user. And co-design is when you empower people to be the designer. And I think that's really the future of this whole design and maker movement. And we really felt this in Detroit. And where I think this starts to tie into civics is that you can sit around and talk about stuff, but you could also build stuff. And so civics, I think, is going to involve a lot more of making. And so if we go back to this slide, this is the way it was. This is the way that it is now. But I think there's a new thing. So let's shove all of mainstream media and social media and everything into, and so we don't have to invent a new word. Let's use public sphere and say a network public sphere where people get to hang out and talk to each other. And it's two-way with the government. But then there's a participatory democracy which includes civics, which is Seth, about getting off the plane and doing stuff. But instead of writing a letter, instead of writing a blog post, instead of voting, you can go out and actually do something about it yourself. Now everything that government does will be replaced by citizens, but a tremendous amount of it can. And I think one of the things that's really, really key is as we talk about things like development, we used to talk about sending food. Then we talked about you have to send the tools, give the person a fishing pole, teach them to fish, education. But you know what? They're able to design their own futures. And as we think about the future of social media and all this other stuff, one really, really important thing, and this will be my last point, is that, so we sent some students to Shenzhen where they're making these IP illegal, but these $12, $13 cell phones. And they iterate. Every week they make 1,000, they sell them at the stalls, they A/B test, and they make another 1,000. And it's really like agile software except with hardware. These $12 cell phones are the same cell phones that the kids in Tahrir Square in Egypt were using. They're the same cell phones that I saw in the favelas in Rio. There is a developing country network of innovation, of frugal engineering, using very, very lightweight, very constrained tools. It costs 25 cents to recharge your phone in Africa in places where the average income is $1 a day. And so they're going to come up with a completely new sphere of innovation, as well as a completely new way of thinking about emergent democracy. So I think what's really important is to be careful about sitting here in the first world, where we have one of the least popular congresses in the world, in history, in Japan, where it's very, very unpopular. And then you see Egypt and Tunisia and all these other countries trying to rebuild their democracies. Why are they going to look at us as an example? Maybe we should be looking to them for possible futures about what we might be. Thank you.